Welcome to the Law Awareness Weeks at CDC 2024. This webinar is part of Law Awareness Weeks at CDC 2024. It is a collaboration between Pro Bono SG, the 5 Community Development Councils, National University of Singapore Faculty of Law, Singapore University of Social Sciences School of Law, Singapore Management University School of Law, the Singapore Corporate Counsel Association, Pro Bono Chapter, and the Singapore Association of Social Workers, supported by the People's Association. I am Jerrick Lim, and I am your host for this webinar. Today's webinar is divorce under civil law. But first, some housekeeping matters. Today, we will be using Pigeonhole Live for our Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any point during the webinar and also upvote on any questions that may interest you. If you have a smartphone or a tablet with you, just launch your internet browser and enter www.pigeonhole.at into the address bar. Next, key in our event passcode, which is LawCDC2411 as shown on the slide. Alternatively, you can click on the link shared in the chat function to launch Pigeonhole Live on your device. If you are viewing this webinar on your laptop or desktop, you should receive an invitation to launch Pigeonhole. Please note that today's discussion is not intended to substitute any form of professional legal advice. If you require specific legal advice, please consult a lawyer. With that, I would like to introduce our panelists for today's webinar, Yap Teong Liang and Yeow Ming Zhen. Our legal expert today is Mr. Yap Teong Liang, founder and director at TL Yap Law Chambers LLC. Teong Liang is a highly accredited family law practitioner in practice for over 30 years. His boutique law firm was set up in 2002, offering specialized legal services in family law practice, including disputes involving relocation and child abduction. Teong Liang is the chairperson of the Family Law and Family Rights Council of Law Asia. He also sits on the panel of child representatives by the Family Justice Courts. Joining us in our discussion is Ms. Yeow Ming Zhen. Ming Zhen is head at Methodist Welfare Services Strengthening Families Program at Family Service Center, where they take on cases and support couples and families with marital and family counseling, including discernment counseling, divorce counseling, and phone and online counseling. She started out as a preschool educator, but her interest in children led her to take on community child protection work. She is a child-centric social worker and a family therapist by training. Teong Liang and Ming Zhen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us, Eric.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you very much. Our law awareness talks for divorce have been a long-running series of discussions, and the questions from previous years have always been interesting and thought-provoking. This year, we thought it may be a good opportunity to start from the very beginning and give an overview that covers divorce in 2024. Allow me to start by stating that divorce is a significant decision for any family to consider before we get into the dry legalities and loathsome administration of it all. We recognize that significant time, energy, and possibly even money has been spent arriving at this point where divorce is being contemplated. This discussion is meant to set the stage for a better understanding of Singapore's divorce law. But note that ultimately every matter is specific to you and your family. If you need help, do seek the advice of a family social worker, counselor, or legal professional for your specific matter. With all of this in mind, we will cover the following topics in the following order. Number 1, can you apply for a divorce? Number 2, what is a ground for divorce? Number 3, money, kids, and the dog? What are ancillary matters? And number 4, how the court will work in a divorce procedure and what's new in divorce. With that, we move on to our first topic. Can you apply for divorce in Singapore? Ming Zhen, can you share with us your thoughts on divorce? In Singapore, before you can even get a divorce, there'll be a question of whether the court can even take your case in the first place, whether the court has jurisdiction.
Thank you, Jerry. I think more than anything, nobody gets into a marriage imagining that one day they will have to actually go through divorce. I think more than anything that the couple themselves is going through, it's actually very important for them to also recognize that the children as well as the extended families are also affected in the process, and there is a change in family structure and a change in family system. But I think it's significant and important for us to also recognize that as long as the couple have children together, they will always be each other co-parent. So long they have children with them, they will have to interact with each other. They will have to talk to each other with regards to the matter of the children. So no matter how they are feeling towards each other, it's important that they have to communicate and they have to work things out amicably for the sake of the children, no matter what they are feeling and going through.
I see. And thank you for that. Teong Liang, can you briefly talk about the laws around this question of how the Singapore family courts can or maybe cannot take on a matter involving divorce? What are the criteria that must be met before one can file a divorce application?
Indeed, Jerrick. The first point is under Singapore law, you can't file the divorce within the first 3 years of your marriage. It's what we call a time bar. And that's essentially a policy reason because marriage is a sanctity, and policy-wise, right, we should try all ways and means to try and preserve the marriage rather than look at divorce as the sort of first port of call, right, to dissolve the marriage. In addition to that, you still have to show to the court that one of the parties is domiciled in Singapore, which means you are a Singapore citizen, for example. But what happens if you have cross-border marriages in which one or both of the parties are not Singapore citizens? In that kind of scenario, what is then required under the law is that one or both of the parties will need to be habitually resident in Singapore for a minimum period of 3 years. And this minimum period has to be continuous leading up to the time of filing the application for divorce. So those are the criteria that require or must be satisfied before the Singapore courts have the jurisdiction to hear the divorce application.
Thank you for sharing on the question of jurisdiction. Ming Zhen, I understand that the mandatory parenting program may have been in place for some time. Could you share with us what the MPP entails today?
Yes, of course. Mandatory parenting program has been renamed to co-parenting program, and this is actually a mandatory step for any couple or individuals who have children below 21 years old who wants to go for divorce. Yeah, and this consists of two different components or two different steps. One is actually the e-learning session that the individual have to go through online. And the second step is where they actually go for a one-to-one consultation with a counselor. This session can be done either online or face-to-face. But the purpose of this session is to actually talk about some of the divorce proceeding related issue. For example, co-parenting matters, care and custody issues, access to their children, talking about their finances matter, living arrangement, changes that will occur to them once they have considered divorce, or if, let's say, they are really going through that divorce proceeding. So the purpose of really going for this one-to-one consultation session is to make sure that they are prepared. They have thought through all these very important matters. The children are also considered in the process before they take this official step. Yeah, and for this session, even though it's a one-to-one consultation of one session, the session can actually stretch up to a maximum of 3 sessions, depending on how many sessions the individual need. Yeah, and if let's say they want to continue on to see the social worker or counselor, even subsequently after the session, they can do that. But it's important to note that so long they have children below 21 years old, this is a step that they cannot miss, and they have to go through it to make sure that when it comes to co-parenting arrangement and decision making, they have thought this through, and this is part of the consideration as well.
Understood. And Teong Liang, speaking of the children, are there any important points you've noted in your practice as a cross-border family lawyer?
I think one of the major things about cross-border family practice with regards to children is relocation, for example. So you may have a situation whereby the parents have come to Singapore because of work, and unfortunately the marriage breaks down and they have no longer a family base here in Singapore and no connections to Singapore. So the result of that is they would look at opportunities to relocate back either to their home country or to another country in which their work may take them. And that's always a huge challenge because it impacts quite greatly, firstly, the children having to relocate to another country, to the left behind parent, right? I.e. the parent who's going to continue living in Singapore. And that has a direct impact on the frequency of the contact time the children will have with the left behind parent. So it becomes a more challenge because you can't have your regular access on the week-to-week basis, your weekend access time, taking the kids to their activities or their playtime. Because once they are in an overseas country and one parent is not with them, then the contact time becomes a huge challenge insofar as the physical space is concerned. What then happens potentially is you make arrangements for what is known as remote access. So access via Facebook, WhatsApp video calls or audio calls. And depending on the age of the children, sometimes that may not work well because the younger the children, their concentration levels to be in front of a screen consistently for 50 minutes, 20 minutes becomes a huge challenge. And that for the access quality, right, becomes impacted. And if the children are young, it becomes a bigger problem because the development stages, right, where they require the love and care and concern of both parents becomes limited in that space. So yes, that's one of the hugest challenges in cross-border family work.
It sounds very much like that. But we will now move on because we don't have actually that much time onto our next point, which is talking about the grounds for divorce. What is a ground for divorce? So let's say we've now established that we can file for a divorce in Singapore. We will now have to consider the 6 grounds of divorce. After the courts are satisfied that they have jurisdiction, we must be able to satisfy the courts that there is a reason for them to give you, in inverted commas, a divorce. These are the so-called 6 grounds of divorce, with the 6 being a fairly recent development in Singapore's legal scene. The 6 grounds are, number 1, adultery. Number 2, unreasonable behavior. Number 3, separation of 3 years with consent. Number 4, separation of 4 years without consent. Number 5, desertion of 2 years. And number 6, mutually agreeing to a divorce. While some of these 6 grounds sound very obvious, the devil is obviously always in the details. Ming Zhen, now before going into the legalities of each of these grounds, can you share with us some insights into how you approach supporting a family in the early stages of thinking about divorce?
Thank you, Jerry. I think there's a lot of different ways around it. I think first of all, if they are at the very early stage of contemplating or even considering divorce, we will actually recommend for discernment counseling. So discernment counseling is actually different from marital counseling. The purpose of it is not to make sure that the couple stay within the marriage. Discernment counseling is a special counseling technique, a short-term counseling one as well, where it consists of 1 to maximum 5 counseling sessions. And the purpose of it is for the couples in the session to decide whether they want to go for divorce, they want to stay in the marriage, or whether they want to postpone this decision making because it's just not a good time to be considering divorce at that point. So within very short 1 to 5 sessions, they will be able to work through whether divorce is really the way to go. And the purpose of it is really to weigh out the pros and cons and to take note that the purpose is not to keep them in the marriage, but it's for them to communicate, to make an informed and considered decision. So either way, if one person decides that divorce is the way to go, at least it has been communicated with the other person. The other person will not be surprised. They will be in full knowledge that both of them have tried. They have went for this counseling together, and that another person is aware that the decision has been made, so that after the decision has been made, the procedure can then take place, such as, for example, the person can apply for co-parenting program as long as they have children below 21 years old. I think the other part that we will also recommend is the couple can also decide whether they require mediation, because the mediation is to consider and discuss through the terms and the conditions that they themselves want to lay out for the point of divorce. So what we are actually highlighting here is communication is very important. Yeah, the purpose of communication is to make sure that this is carried out in the most amicable way. It does not have long-term implication on the individual, does not affect the children as much as possible. And let's not forget there's extended family members that they will have to consider in the process, especially when festive season come around. How do they explain what they are going through? So we don't want surprise for either party, right? So and I think we are highlighting this also because how divorce is a really stressful process. We want people to have thought this through, make consider an informed decision to leave the stress outside of court and to consider this even before they go to the court session, so that they have worked things out even outside of court. Yeah.
That's really sound advice. Now, Teong Liang, before we go into all of the 6 grounds of divorce, let's talk about the newest, the so-called 6th ground of divorce first, mutually agreeing to a divorce.
Thanks, Jerrick. Legally, there's actually only one ground for divorce, which is the irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. And how we prove that is exactly as what you mentioned, Jerrick, is really the 5 facts. And now the 6th fact, which is divorce by mutual agreement, or DMA for short, right? And in Singapore, we obviously like acronyms, right? So DMA is just another added acronym to a whole host of what we have. So divorce by mutual agreement has come about since the 1st of July, 2024. Now, the idea of this is really to allow parties who have come to a consensus that they have decided that the marriage can no longer be sustainable to proceed with the divorce, where both of them have agreed to the reasons for the divorce. So unlike, for example, adultery and unreasonable behavior, there is some element of blame on the other spouse. Separation, whether it's 3 years with consent or separation with 4 years, will not have an element of blame because it is just confirming that prior to the commencement of the divorce, both husband and wife have already been separated for 3 to 4 years. In the divorce by mutual agreement, it is not intended to make divorce easy. So if you decide to go ahead and rely on divorce by mutual agreement, you'll be required to comply and satisfy the court with several things. The first is you would still have to set out the reasons for the divorce, and these are the reasons which both of you have agreed to. The second part of it is you will have to set out the attempts you have made to reconcile the marriage. It does not require, however, professional counseling that parties have to go through. It is just listing the attempts that both have tried to salvage the marriage. In addition to that, you would also have to state that why is it that you think that further attempts of reconciliation would not yield a happy outcome of a reconciliation of the marriage. Aside from the reconciliation and the reasons for the divorce, you would also have to inform the court of what financial arrangements have been discussed between the parties in relation, for example, to spousal maintenance or division of assets. And the other aspect is also to state what arrangements mom and dad have discussed in relation to their children and whether such agreements have been arrived at. Even if there's no agreement on the financial, spousal maintenance, or children's arrangements, it is fine. But the whole idea is still that at the time of the divorce, it assists parties in thinking through, all these aspects, which will be a consequence of the divorce proceedings. And I think, as Ming Zhen mentioned, right, more particularly, I think it helps parties to focus on what would be arrangements in the best interest of their children, who are actually impacted the most in relation to the divorce proceedings and the breakup of the family, because they will no longer have mommy and daddy living in the same house. Right? So having to make parties, mom and dad, to think about these arrangements, I think is an important step, even though it's a divorce by mutual agreement. So the overarching idea and concept is really for parties undergoing a divorce to think things through in relation to their own children.
So we are not going to go through the other 5 grounds of divorce in a lot of detail, but I've noticed that there are some questions already coming in regarding the facts of divorce, as you've highlighted. Like, for example, someone has asked if there's no physical contact for more than 10 years, would there be grounds for divorce? Or questions like, my husband wants a divorce, but I didn't want a divorce, but he's moving out. So does that mean that we can divorce after 4 years of separation? I think all these questions are quite typical, and people have their doubts about it. So it would be good, I think, to demystify some of the common misconceptions that our friends might have.
Yeah. So let me try to demystify, as you call it, Jerrick, these questions. They are all important questions. Sometimes it's difficult to navigate, and I can totally appreciate that. So dealing with the first question as to what happens if there's no physical contact for more than 10 years, right? So that could lead to, for example, either a separation situation, or it could be parties are still living in the same house, but there's no physical intimacy. And that can be amounting to unreasonable behavior, or as an example of unreasonable behavior. Right? But if you have a situation where parties are separated, and just to clarify, when I say separated, under the law, it permits separation within the same household, right? That means parties are still staying under the same roof, but in separate bedrooms. But what is important is that there must be an intention to put an end to the marriage, firstly, and 2, during the period of separation, they no longer live as husband and wife, which means they live independent lives from each other. So they come and go to do their own things without the need to be a couple. If you have a situation where one spouse wishes to have a divorce and the other does not wish to have a divorce, then that's something that Ming Zhen was mentioning earlier, right? Try and explore if there's a possibility of reconciliation, right? Maybe it's a communication issue, maybe certain things you need to work through, particularly if you have children, right? As I mentioned earlier, divorce is not your first port of call, right, to go to. But if reconciliation is no longer an option, then yes, if he moves out of the home, if you have 3 years of separation, that is actually physical separation in 2 different households. If you have 3 years and the other party consents, then you can have 3 years separation. If not, he'll have to wait for 4 years for separation.
Thank you very much for that. I think that's very helpful to help answer some of the questions that we have already started receiving. Thank you very much to our audience as well for your thoughtful questions. Ming Zhen, would couples contemplating divorce be able to approach a FAM at FSC? What is the role of MWS FAM at FSC?
Thank you for asking that, Jerry. Okay, so FAM at FSC is actually a MSF initiated service. I think like what Teong Liang also mentioned just now about if couples are considering whether the marriage they are able to actually go for marital counseling to work on the marriage. I think I want to highlight and emphasize that this is actually a free counseling service, that has been developed by MSF, and is meant to provide any form of marital, divorce, family counseling for anyone who can benefit from this service. And the purpose of it, as it suggests, it actually meant to strengthen families. So the long name of our FAM at FSC is actually Strengthening Families Program at Family Service Center. Yeah, and we actually at the same time run different kind of divorce support program for family justice court orders as well. So some of these divorce support program actually talks about better co-parenting arrangement. We also have children group work to actually let the children be able to also hear from other children how is it like for the other families to also be going through divorce. Yeah, so letting the children be able to hear from an objective and non-biased manner in terms of like how families experience divorce, so that they don't just hear from their parents only. Yeah, and on top of that, I think we also run support group for either men or for women. Specific gender group work for them to actually go through divorce, knowing that they are not alone in the journey and they have other people who are also going through this journey together with them. So FEMFSC serve anyone as long as there's a Singaporean or PR within the family. And to highlight again, this is a free service. So they can just look up the information from online. They can go to MSF website, look for FEMFSC, Strengthening Families Program at Family Service Center. So help can be given at any point of time. In fact, I keep highlighting about this case where a newly married couple actually called and actually highlighted how they have no issue at all, but they just want to better work on their communication. And is it possible for them to get this service? So we did take the case in because it's actually all about preempting for problems to actually strengthen communication and relationship before any problems occur, right? We also don't want problems to worsen and snowball and escalate into a big problem before they start working on it together. Yeah, so we want to actually improve communication among couples and family. We advocate for people to seek help as early as possible. And to also highlight that how we actually provide different kind of programs. So if let's say they are interested in just going for the programs, for example, how do they actually learn better co-parenting arrangement? It's possible for them to also just go to a FEMFSC and ask for the group work service as well.
That's really helpful, and I think it gives a very good overview of the work that FEMFSC does. We'll now move on to our next slide, which is money, kids, and the dog. What are ancillary matters? So let's say that the divorce proceeding has been started, is going along, and we are now faced with the question of the ancillary matters. I'm going to ask Ming Zhen to first talk briefly on the matters faced, in her work at the Methodist Welfare Services Strengthening Families program at the FSC. When you're no longer dealing with matters of the heart, but really the lived reality of not having a spouse.
Yeah, so I think it's extremely difficult because first of all, we have to acknowledge that it's a very painful process, that you have to acknowledge that the marriage has broken down for whatever reason. And the individual they themselves might be going through a lot of stressor. I mean, divorce proceeding is actually very stressful process. Imagine the process of them having to take leave from work, having to explain to their extended family what's going on, having to also be able to actually manage their employment at the same time while having to go through this legal proceeding. I think even the bigger issue here is how do they work out, for example, like what you say, the care and custody, the ancillary matters, they have to actually start planning to move out and have to stay in two different households. How do they maintain that finances when it comes to two households? How do they split the bill when it comes to the finances of the children? And I think most of all, how do they spend time for the children and with the children as a family, even moving ahead, right? I mean, we realistically also talk about how every week there's 7 days and there's no possible way for them to split equally. For the children to have equal time with the mother, equal time with the father. At the same time, I think what we experience a lot of times is parents doesn't know how to talk to their children about divorce. Yeah, because they themselves are going through this very difficult transition. And it's very, very normal for them to not know how to actually have this conversation with children. But we also want to highlight that children do understand what their family is going through. They see what is happening at home. They experience their parents' emotions at the same time. I've worked with children for as young as 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, who actually understand that something is happening. 4 years old child understand what divorce is because they have heard from other children in school as well. Yeah, and at the same time, children do have questions about what is happening at home. For example, they might wonder whether, oh, daddy is not staying here anymore, but would they get to see daddy tomorrow? Would they get to see daddy over the weekend? So there are questions that the children might be thinking about, or even sometimes they might end up blaming themselves for what their family is going through, because they are not sure, and sometimes they see their parents arguing and quarreling about them, right? So children might have the misconception or develop certain stories that, oh, maybe the parents are going through this because of them, because of their behavior. So it's actually very important that we actually emphasize and highlight to parents that they need to communicate this to the children. It doesn't have to use the word divorce, but they are able to also explain exactly what is happening. When will they get to see their father or mother next? Who is going to send them to school? Will they get to actually see their friends if they were to move school? Yeah, if they were to move out of their current house and stay in another house, how would the arrangement be like? So children need to have that routine. Children need to understand what is happening for them, in order to make sure that they are assured that their parents, that they will still have communication with their parents. They will still get to see them either way. Yeah.
That's really helpful to know. And then as a parent myself, I definitely understand that point about having to have a routine. Allow me to now briefly touch on a very uncomfortable matter. But what if there's violence in the household?
Thanks for touching on that very difficult topic, Jerry. When there's violence at home, it's extremely tricky and difficult. For violence occurring at home, we do advocate as social workers and counselors that the individual must seek help as early as possible. Yeah, because we know that a lot of time the victims will also want to protect their own family members, right? And they might think that, oh, the violence will stop. But based on the nature of the nature of violence, we do know that the tendency of it occurring again or continuously happening is actually quite high. Yeah, so because of the fact that it might continuously happen, it's very important for them to know how to seek help, either going straight to a family service center. Yeah, or if let's say they want to actually approach family violence specialist center, and there are also this option where they can actually apply for personal protection order. Yeah, and for personal protection order is actually once they apply for it, it doesn't mean that the perpetrator will actually get into trouble with the law immediately. So we always emphasize and highlight that personal protection order is a prevention method. So meaning that before violence happen, if let's say they have the personal protection order, they are able to actually call for help. And if let's say the perpetrator doesn't do anything after the PPO is in place, the person would not get into any legal issue with the police as well. So it's a prevention method to make sure that violence don't happen as much as possible. And at the same time, for personal protection order, it usually comes with counseling order as well. So it's actually a process where the individuals will actually get to go for individual counseling to talk about what exactly is happening in the dynamic or the interaction, and for the perpetrator to also be able to seek help by talking to a professional in terms of developing better coping strategy, be able to actually cope with the problems that are happening at home that resulted in the violence in the first place. Yeah, so the counseling session is also meant to work on and improve the relationship so that we can actually look at avoiding violence as a means, to avoid using violence as a means to resolve any issue that they might be going through. At the same time, I think it's important for parents to recognize that when there's violence happening at home, it doesn't just affect them, but it also affects the children, because by witnessing violence happening at home, it does affect the children. I have worked on cases before. Actually, one of the most serious cases that I've worked with, the 4-year-old child actually witnessed the family violence where the mother was nearly thrown out of the HDB flat. Yeah, so that was a very serious case. The child actually developed selective mutism right after the incident. So she wasn't able to speak with any friends. She wasn't able to speak with the teachers in school because of that very traumatic event that she has witnessed. So when we talk about violence at home, obviously, it's not just physical violence as well. If there is psychological violence, it is also very important for the individual to seek help as soon as possible.
Thank you so much for that. I think it's a very tough problem, but not an intractable one. Teong Liang, from your experience, we assume that family breakdown takes place from a place of a spouse dissatisfaction regarding something intangible. But what if a couple is able to agree on certain aspects of the ancillary matters, but not others?
The law certainly encourages parties to try and agree as much as you can, right? So one of the first things you would try to agree to is the reason for the divorce. Because in all honesty, right, if the marriage has come to an end, there is really no point in going to court and litigate over the reasons for the divorce, right? It's just going to increase more time and expense unnecessarily. But if you can reach a resolution and a settlement on the arrangements for the children, and the family law system allows parties as many opportunities as possible to try and do that, right? One, you could do it through the court counseling once divorce proceedings have started. Two, you could go through mediation, which I think we'll be discussing in a short while. But it's really to have awareness, right, of the impact it will have on the children when there's a divorce in the family, right? And that's precisely what Ming Zhen has been talking about, right? And giving all the real life examples in the cases that she's handled. Sometimes we do not ourselves realize, right, that the children, no matter how young, they have all their five senses, right? So they see, they feel, they touch, right? They hear, right? And without realizing it, right, the quarrels in the home, the family violence in the home has an impact. It will not come about immediately, right? But it will surface, right, as social science research will show, some years down the road, right, as they grow up into their teens, right, and some carry into their adulthood. So the ability to try and reach an agreement is something that's totally encouraged by the law, and opportunities are given, not just in relation to children's arrangement, but certainly in the finances aspect, right? Division of assets, maintenance for the children, providing for their sustenance, their school, things like that, right? So yes, if you can reach an agreement on everything before you even commence divorce proceedings, then it allows parties to file the divorce on what we call the simplified track. And that shortens the entire process, because once what we call the draft consent order or the draft interim judgment is prepared and signed off, once you file it in court, if all that is in place and the courts have no queries, the court will approve that and grant the divorce and approve the terms of the settlement.
That was really helpful. Going back to the question about finances, what if one person in the relationship is in a much less financially stable position than the other?
Yeah, so that in and of itself, and that's probably a common concern, right, doesn't mean that you're disadvantaged insofar as care of the children are concerned. So the care of children is about who's been the primary caregiver, who is the better parent to look after the welfare and interests of the children. And if I may just take some time, there is an important distinction to understand. So when it comes to children's arrangements, there's this concept of custody and a concept of care and control. So custody is about making major decisions concerning your children, health, education, and religion. And most of the cases now, right, almost by default, it is joint custody, which means post the breakdown of the marriage, both mom and dad will continue, right, to play a part, to have to discuss, hopefully come to an agreement in major decisions concerning your children. It's actually no different from a functioning family, right? Mom and dad will discuss matters. They can agree to disagree, but they'll still have that discussion. So no one parent post the breakdown of the marriage will have some superior right to make such decisions for the children. Care and control is a concept of which parent will look after the day-to-day care of the children, right? So to take care of the sleep time, the meals, the sending to school, dropping off from school, sending to tuition, things like that, right? are the day-to-day care and control matters. And for the parent who does not have care and control, he or she will have access to the children. And access is a term of what we can sometimes call contact time, right? In which weekends, school holidays, special holidays, things like, for example, where arrangements can be made, but it will revolve around the children's routines and school schedules.
On that point, I mean, so I talked about the financial concept, but what if one spouse is actually significantly more responsible at the moment prior to the divorce for the care of the children than the other? How would it work, to seek a co-parenting solution for the family?
Yes. So it will come to a situation where, so co-parenting comes, for example, in the joint custody arrangement. That's one. Two, in relation to the co-parenting, there's a care and control. It could be with one parent. In the scenario example you have given, it will be with the primary caregiver, may go, for example, to mom, or in certain cases to dad. Right? So the co-parenting arrangement is still about, right, trying, even in the care and control situation, to have both mom and dad agree to certain things. So the child doesn't go to one household during the week, right? Have a certain regime, and then goes to the weekend mom or the weekend dad, right? And have a completely different regime. That I think will only cause confusion to the child. I think worse still, it will allow the child to play against both parents, right? And they will then rule the roost, right? They will control both mom and dad, actually, right? So they will do certain things in one household and then do and say, oh, why can't I do this, right? So I think if both mom and dad are able to come to a consensus as to how they wish to bring up their child under circumstances which are not ideal for the children, right? That's sort of the next best thing, right? To a functioning family. Yeah.
And on that note, I think Ming Zhen, you've worked with many families who are going through a divorce. How would this impact on those children in such a situation?
I think thank you for this very, very important question that Teong Liang and myself have been advocating for. I think we have to actually acknowledge that divorce is a really difficult and painful process for the individual who is going through it. It's a very stressful one. I mean, I was also highlighting just now that sometimes it gets so stressful that people don't realize and recognize it. They have to take leave from work, keep going back to the court. They have to actually pay for the legal fee. They have to manage their children. The day-to-day doesn't stop while this whole process is happening. In fact, we do have clients who develop health implication or even have like employment issues that came out in the process, and it's actually very difficult, and we want to highlight how mental health and physical health is very important, but at the same time, right, children is so dependent on their parents. Yeah, we are talking about the day-to-day managing, the caregiving of the children, sending the children to school, dropping them off tuition, paying for their finances, putting food on the table for the children. Yeah, so the children do experience all this difficulty quite a lot. Yeah, and I think some of the cases that I wanted to highlight is also how I really like the example that Teong Liang was saying just now, right? Like if the parents don't discuss, it becomes the fact that the children rule the parents and play against each other. We have in fact seen such cases where some of the children, especially if let's say they have reached the upper primary school age, right, they are able to actually then decide, instead of staying with this parent from Monday to Wednesday, they will rather go to the other parent's house because the living arrangement as well as the terms and conditions at that house might be a little bit different, right? So we have seen children who run to another parent's house and refuse to come back to this parent's house. So inconsistent parenting strategies can also further and subsequently develop affect the child and parent relationship. So it will affect how the children feel towards individual parents as well. So they might say things like, how come daddy always agree, then you always say no to everything? How come mommy always give me this, then daddy don't do that, right? So this will become another added stress for the parents subsequently, while they have to actually manage the children while they are going through the divorce proceeding again. I think another part that we have to also take note and highlight is how in the process of going through divorce, it's still very important for the children to have adequate supervision and care, because there might be times where the parents might feel emotionally it's harder for them to be present. Yeah, and we have instances where like older children or even like adolescent who started to turn to unhealthy coping strategies because of their own stress with academic as well as what is happening at home. So inadequate supervision that could lead to, for example, behavioral issues, right? So parents might not be aware how the children are doing outside of home. Yeah, and I think the other part that is very important is sometimes children feel the important need to actually be there for their parents, especially when their parent is already losing the other spouse, right? So they feel the need to be present for them. They feel the need to please them, make them happy, almost like responsible for their happiness subsequently. Yeah, and this does take a toll on the children themselves because there's this term where we say the divided loyalty, right? So they will have to actually feel that, oh, do I have to side father or do I have to side mother? At which point do I protect mom more? At which point do I protect dad more? So we don't want children to actually get involved in such adult matters. Children are young, they need to go through childhood and adolescenthood the way they need to go through it, and they shouldn't be responsible or accountable for their parents' issue just because the marriage is breaking down. Yeah, and we need to highlight that when the parents are in pain, the children see the pain, the children feel the pain as well. Sometimes if the parents feel that, oh, maybe the children don't understand the divorce, they might hide information, they might come up with other stories, which really wouldn't be helpful for the children because they hear things even from their extended family. So they develop different ideas of what exactly is happening at home. And sometimes this idea would not be helpful for them to maintain the relationship with either of the parents. So we often tell parents that when they are going through something like that, it's actually important to keep things factual with the children, to just tell the children what their parents are going through now. There's no need to actually overshare details such as, oh, your father did this, that's why I wanted to go for divorce, because it will only affect the children more by tainting the idea about how the father has some fault, and after growing up, maybe the children will also have difficulty maintaining certain relationship if, let's say, the divorce conversations end up to be that direction. So it's very important to keep things factual for the children, to let them know that daddy and mommy is going through divorce, and to reassure them that daddy and mommy still love them no matter what, that daddy and mommy will still be present when would daddy and mommy be seeing them. So for the children to know exactly what is happening to their family relationship, their living arrangement, as well as will it affect, for example, their school arrangement as well.
Thank you so much. I think that was a very comprehensive look at the kind of thought processes that a lot of parents will go through. In terms of providing for children's welfare, Teong Liang, can you talk to us a little bit about how the court deals with apportioning maintenance for the children?
Sure, definitely. The starting point would be, what would the children need on a month-to-month basis, what we call reasonable monthly expenses. So that would include things like their school fees, school bus, tuition, CCA activities, food, clothing, medical, insurance premiums, just to give you a few examples, and it will vary from family to family. So once we are able to have that breakdown of their monthly expenses, how would the court then apportion? And that's a very good question, Jerrick. Right? So let me just give an example, right? Just to put in context. Let's say a child needs, let's say, $2,000 per month, right? And the parents earn an equal amount of salary per month, right? And when I talk salary, what usually happens is that the courts will look at assessing their monthly income based on the income tax notices of assessment, right? Because some may get a low monthly but a higher commissions or bonuses. So taking the average of the annual income would be a fairer way of trying to ascertain what each parent earns. So for example, if they earn about the same, then one parent will be asked to contribute, right, half of that. So it's $1,000 in the example I've given, right? And if it's 75-25 split, for example, then the parent who earns less, let's say 25% of the combined income, will be expected to then contribute 25% of that $2,000. I think that makes it about $500.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so that's the apportionment. And I think to complete it, children's maintenance is usually on a monthly basis, right? And the period to support your children is until they reach the age of 21 years, right? That's the age of majority in Singapore, or they are in gainful employment, or they complete tertiary education, which is first degree, right? So it could be a situation, for example, in the Singapore context, boys will go through NS at 18, they'll finish in 2 years at 20, then they start university, by which time they're over 21 years of age, right? But it doesn't mean, sorry, you hit 21, now I no longer have to maintain my child. So if they're in university, you would still have to provide for them at the level in which they require and what would be their expenses, reasonable expenses, same concept at that point in time.
Got it. Got it. So Ming Zhen, you mentioned earlier that you are a child-centric social worker. In the course of your work in the past and even now in the current role, what are some of the striking issues that you've observed regarding children when a marriage has broken down?
If we focus on the issue that the children will have to go through, I think first of all, the major one will still be going back to the living arrangement, the school arrangement. I think at the same time, sometimes they have a lot of curiosity and questions about what is happening, but they might not feel safe enough to also approach anyone because they know that their parents might be very stressed going through that. And they might also know that if, let's say, they were to approach their parents to ask questions about divorce, the answer that they might get might also not be so objective or factual, right? So, and hence, what they usually need will be, if let's say they have questions surrounding divorce, like will there be safe person or adult that they can go to, that they can ask about and speak about? Yeah, and I think a lot of time we have to also recognize that emotionally, when the children are also affected in the process of divorce, they will have to cope through different ways, right? So we have seen example and cases where children academic might suffer, unfortunately, because of the lack of concentration in class, because they are so worried about what is happening at home. And the other time will be in terms of their social relationship with their friends, because they might also struggle to tell their friends why you can't come over to my house today, why you only see my mom fetching, where is my father from now on. The children will have to actually come up with some ways to also manage and tackle such issue. And socially, they might then experience some difficulty depending on how they cope as well. I mean, I have also seen for myself where there is actually a case where a particular child in primary school finds so much struggle and difficulty to talk to the other children about what her family is going through. She ended up finding friends whom parents are divorced as well as her only friends that she hang out with. Yeah, so these are changes and things that sometimes is very hard to notice. But what really is important is to check in with the children and to reassure them again, like daddy and mommy still love them, right? So in fact, I have this 4-year-old child. He asked a very intelligent question. I think both the father and myself were very shocked with. He actually asked, will daddy continue to love me? Last time you loved mommy, but now you don't love mommy anymore. So he actually asked that question also because he feels enough safety to ask the father, like very real questions like that, right? Will you still love me next time, given that you loved mom last time, but you don't love mom anymore? So creating that communication platform where the children can feel safe enough to ask any questions is actually very essential and important. And of course, the responsibility don't need to lie with just the parents, but it can also be, for example, extended families or friends whom the parents can trust, right? That the children can also feel close and supported by, where if let's say the children have any question that they don't feel comfortable asking the parents, they can go to these adults around in his or her life to actually ask any questions that they have, rather than imagining the worst, or rather than letting it constantly affect them when they are thinking through all these questions. Or sometimes nowadays, we know that children and adolescents will go online and search, right? Go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT. But ChatGPT or online responses will definitely not be applicable or customized based on what their family is going through. So it's important for there to be adults who are present enough to support them and who are present enough to be able to reassure them that they have support, that they can talk to anyone if they need it. Yeah.
That's really helpful to know.
Jerrick, if I may, could I just add on to
Sure,
what
please.
mentioned, which I think may be important from the moms and dads out there to think about. I've seen in some of the cases I've handled that, you know, when a child comes back from dad's place, mom may be asking the child, oh, what have you been doing? Who was there? Has dad been going out? You know, are you there all the time? So that's one facet of it, right? The other is they could be asking the children all these questions and sometimes sort of video recording them, right? In order to sort of build up a case to show, right? Oh, eventually they put it in evidence in court, right? That you look at this video, this is how the child was responding, right? I would very comfortably say, right, that that is discouraged by the courts, right? For the very simple reason that it puts the child in the spotlight, right? And two, worse still, in some of these video recordings that I have come across, right? You can sort of see the leading questions, right? That's being asked of the child, right? You know, was daddy or mommy with a boyfriend, girlfriend, you know, things like that. And the children actually, as I mentioned, puts them in the spotlight and shines the light directly on them, right? And I think children ought not to be placed in that kind of scenario.
Right. Almost like a pawn in this chess game that they are playing.
Correct. Or, you know, taking lots of pictures and producing all those pictures, right, in court. Those are not things that would be encouraged by the courts. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And if I may go back to the question of matrimonial assets, Teong Liang. And we got a question from this on this point. How does the court divide matrimonial assets? So, like, for example, if you know the situation is that like the wife's contribution is significantly greater, or what if the husband's contribution is less? Like, how would that be taken into account in considering questions of matrimonial assets?
Yes. So division of assets is always an important consideration because you have a breakdown of the family unit, right? And then it's two different households moving forward. So the starting point for division of assets is the court will divide all assets acquired during the marriage. And I will put that in three baskets, for example, anything in the joint names, and normally that will be joint bank accounts or the house in joint names. It will also include all assets in the name of the wife and all assets in the name of the husband. And these assets are not just assets based in Singapore. It can be assets and will include assets based overseas. Right? We could be overseas investment or bank accounts overseas. So once you pull all that together, you'll have a value ascribed to those assets. Okay. Then the court will look at how do I then divide this pool of matrimonial assets? And as you rightly pointed out, the courts will look at what would be the contributions of both husband and wife. And these contributions comes in two main areas. One is what we call the direct financial contributions. And that is monetary terms. So it could be, for example, the down payment for the property, the mortgage repayments, either by cash or through CPF. Renovations, for example. So all these are considered direct financial contributions towards the acquisition of a property. Right? Whatever they have in their own names will also be part of the direct financial contributions towards the entire pool. The second aspect of contributions is what is called the indirect contributions. And there are two parts to this. The indirect contributions relate firstly to what we call the indirect financial contributions. So it could be a situation where the arrangements are such that maybe one spouse takes care of all the household expenses, the children's schooling, maintenance, everything, whilst the other spouse takes care of the mortgage. Right? So it doesn't mean that it comes to divorce. We only look at the spouse that contributed towards the mortgage. Right? So the spouse who contributed to the family's expenses, that contribution will be taken into account.
Yeah.
And the second element to indirect contributions is what we call the non-financial contributions. And this would be the contributions made as a role or in the role of husband or wife, mother or father to your family and to the children. Right? So that's taken care of also, because you may have a situation whereby a spouse gives up her or his career after the children are born to look after full time. Right? So that component is recognized under the law as a contribution towards the matrimonial assets.
Got it.
Right? And between the direct and indirect, there's a weightage ascribed, right, to that. So generally speaking, in the longer marriages, that weightage is equal. So there's no particular emphasis in whether it's direct or indirect. Unlike, for example, in short marriages with no children. Right? And then the court would then make that decision, right, looking at the division based on that contribution. But all that I've just explained very briefly,
Yes.
applies to what we term as dual income marriage, where both mom and dad are working and earning income. But if you have a situation where it's a single income, right, then the courts usually then just look at what is the trend of cases, right, depending on the length of marriage, number of children, things like that, and they decide. So the longer the marriage, sometimes they will incline towards equality. But there's no automatic 50-50 equal division.
And there is no bright line test where it's say, oh, after 10 years, that's considered a long marriage, or after 3 years, that's considered a long marriage, right?
The general trend of the cases, if you're looking above 20 years of marriage, that will fall within the category of long marriage, yes.
Okay. And Ming Zhen, so I understand that the FAM at FSC offers a variety of counseling services, including, as you mentioned, the MPP earlier. Can you explain a little bit more about the different types of counseling services? I think you mentioned discernment counseling. What other counseling services are available?
Yes. So Jerrick, the purpose of setting up FAM at FSC and to actually offer these free services to families in Singapore is really meant for them to build better, stronger family relationship in Singapore. So first of all, we have marital counseling. So like the example I highlighted earlier, it doesn't mean that the couple needs to have issue before they come into counseling. It can really be they just want to improve their relationship because they find that they can have better communication or they can understand each other a little bit better. Right? So marital relationship where they are able to actually talk about any challenges or difficulty that they have in the marriage. We do family counseling. So within family counseling, we actually have family members ranging from different age group. For example, it can be extended family, even in-laws are involved. So we have cases where the marriage has problem or difficulty because of the in-laws involvement. Yeah, so we do encourage the couple to actually come in to either have the marital counseling or to even bring their parents in for the family counseling session. Sometimes this family counseling can also involve siblings if they want to bring the siblings in. So there's really no limitation to the type of family members that they can bring in. The other aspect is definitely divorce counseling. So for some of the cases, in fact, like what Teong Liang has been mentioning, right? The court is really moving towards the direction where as much as possible, the parents must agree on the terms and conditions. So we do take in cases from family justice court, especially if, let's say, the parents couldn't agree on all these conditions at court. They are advised by FJC to also go for counseling at FAM at FSC to work out some of these co-parenting arrangement. And some of these counseling orders can also include us seeing the children, having counseling session for the children, or having group work and support group for the parents and children as well. Yeah. So on top of that, like the discernment counseling one that I just talked about, is for them to actually contemplate within 1 to 5 sessions and to make a considered decision whether they want to stay in the marriage, go for divorce, or they want to postpone this decision. We at the same time, we also do phone and online counseling. This is for people or individuals who might not be comfortable yet to see a counselor and social worker face to face. They might, for whatever reason, prefer to stay anonymous. Yeah, so this online counseling platform is actually offered under the Family Assist website. So if let's say they go to Family Assist website by MSF, they will be able to see this online counseling platform where clients can actually go in to receive counseling for family related issue. And at the same time, if let's say parents feel that there's a need for their children to go for children counseling issues relating to divorce or whatever is happening in the family, we do that kind of session as well, either to see the children one-to-one or to involve the parents when the parents need to discuss this divorce arrangement with the children. So we do highly encourage for parents to feel comfortable and open for their children to come in to talk about divorce relating matters, because it's important for the children voices to be heard, right? Like how do they prefer the arrangement to be, where do they prefer to sleep at which day. So a lot of times the parents made the decision through the court proceeding without discussing and hearing from their children, right? So it's almost like the children lose control of their decision and what they want just because the parents are going through divorce, right? So it's important to hear directly from the children. And I have done a few sessions before where parents feel difficulty talking about divorce with children. That's very normal. So in fact, there are resources out there. If let's say the parents is interested, they can go to Family Assist platform. There's also like short stories and information to actually guide them through how they can talk about divorce with children. There are actually a lot of storybooks that they can find, even in the library or online, where is encouraging the parents to also talk about the family transition if let's say they are moving towards divorce, right? So there are resources for parents to talk about divorce with the children. Yeah, so some of the FAM at FSC, we have to actually do the assess matter as well. So I mentioned there's 10 FAM at FSC across Singapore. So out of them, 3 FAM at FSC do support through the assess process. If let's say the parents are not able to handle the assess procedures on their own, then sometimes the court will also have orders where they actually have to bring the child to these places for them to actually facilitate the access with social workers or counselors present in the room to actually facilitate the access process.
When you say access, you mean access to the children?
Yes, access to the children. And this occur especially if the parents themselves cannot agree and arrange in terms of how do they pass the children from one parent to another, or if let's say they cannot agree on a common place to actually allow the children to be at that place when the contact time were to happen, right? And
so it's like a neutral
platform. Yes. Yeah. And sometimes it's also because of some concerns that we have, whether like for example, just now we were talking about family violence, right? Whether the children might also be affected in the process and be afraid of the other parents. So it's then important for this to be facilitated at a safe and a neutral place where there are professionals involved to be able to facilitate and support that as well. So what Teong Liang mentioned about the recording of the video, right? That there's no need for that also, because sometimes when the professionals are involved in the assess process, the professionals will then also observe in a very neutral and non-biased way how the interaction has been. Yeah.
That's really helpful to understand. So we're now moving on to our last topic for this evening before we take on the Q&A. Questions of mediation and other resolution methods, excuse me. So we know that on top of MPP, during divorce proceedings, the court may order the parties go for mediation. I understand also that there's a resolution procedure called pre-action mediation. So Teong Liang, can you maybe help us understand what this process is like, what mediation is, and why participants should be interested to know more about this.
Thanks, Jerrick. The mediation is a huge component part now of the family law process, right? And mediation is really an option given to parties to try and resolve their dispute without the need to go to court. Right? Mediation, why it's important is because once you start divorce proceedings and you have children under 21 years of age, mediation is mandatory and has been the case for many years now, right? And rightfully so. So it's not something you can sort of avoid, okay? So if you have children, then obviously you have, in the high conflict cases, what the courts will arrange is what they call a therapeutic justice case conference. And it involves a family court counselor together with a mediator judge, the parties, and their lawyers if they are represented, to have this initial discussion. And then after that, the parties will have the opportunity to speak with the family court specialist, okay, to help them navigate arrangements for their children. Right? And you move into a mediation subsequently on the financials, maintenance, division of assets. You talked about the pre-action discovery, pre-action mediation.
Yeah.
So before proceedings have started, if parties are thinking, okay, the marriage has broken down, can we try and reach agreement? They could do so in different ways. One, through negotiations and discussions amongst themselves, they reach an agreement. They may go and see a lawyer to try and prepare the necessary documentation. Or if they are legally represented, we could do what we call without prejudice negotiations.
Yeah.
Right? And it may also come to a situation where after such discussions, they feel, okay, there's certain things they need to iron out, right? And so let's appoint a mediator. And this is all before divorce proceedings have started. So this is pre-action mediation.
Yeah.
So they'll jointly appoint a mediator. Everything that's discussed at the mediation, whether it's through the courts or in the pre-action mediation, is what we call without prejudice, is confidential, so that if there's no settlement, no party can then use that in court against the other party.
Yeah.
Right? So it allows a safe space for discussions.
Yeah.
So this pre-action mediation, the role of the mediator, he or she does not represent either party, is a neutral person who facilitates the discussion, facilitates the ability to try and bridge the gap between the parties, and to try and reach agreement. Yeah.
And just for the benefit of our audience, when you say without prejudice and it's confidential, does that mean that in the court proceeding, you are not allowed to talk about even things that were factual outside of that proceeding? Or is it like, how does that work? How does the process work actually?
So, for example, if during the course of the discussions and at the mediation, certain proposals have been made, or certain concessions have been made in order to try and reach agreement, but unfortunately, they could not reach an agreement. Then if the matter has to go to court, one cannot say, oh, at that mediation 3 months back, right? You actually admitted or you conceded that you're prepared to do this. Why is it now in court you're taking a completely different perspective? Right. So that's what I meant, that it's without prejudice, it's confidential. The court cannot hear of the discussions and
That took place
at the mediation. Yes.
Okay. That's very helpful, Teong Liang. And Ming Zhen, maybe I'll take this with you now. Do you have any thoughts on using mediation as a tool to resolve these disputes?
Yeah. I think we do advocate for mediation to be done almost as early as possible. So it's really all about communication, right? I think what I have picked up even from Teong Liang mentioned is really how to communicate, to go, to even just be able to have discussed all these, so that when by the time they go to court, like at least all these have been considered through. They have really kind of like stirred this like within the court documents as well, right? Because what we are really highlighting and advocating is that this will lead to better outcomes, really not just for themselves, but it's also for to minimize the conflict and the subsequent issues that they might have with each other, right? And we have to also take note that they will continue to interact with each other as co-parents. So if let's say they are able to settle out of court anything relating to divorce, such as care and custody matters, asset and maintenance, this will actually smoothen the whole process of divorce. Yeah, and this will also make it easier and faster if they go through the mediation route and decide on matters before they go into the court session. Yeah, so and at the same time, it's also minimizing the potential emotional, mental stressor that the individual will have to go through. What we don't want is, imagine they're already so stressed out at work and with everything, and they have to actually fight each other out at court for the care and custody, for the asset issues. So if this prolongs, it doesn't just affect themselves, but also the people around them. For example, the children relationship with themselves, for example, how their children are feeling while having to go through all these changes. Even the extended family, right? They might still potentially see each other. What I wanted to highlight is 10 years down the road, they will probably have to meet the children girlfriend or boyfriend together. They will probably have meals together, the wedding. How about when their children have their children and they have grandchildren, right? So to actually be able to discuss and work out all this through communication, as amicably as possible, as early as possible, through the various methods that they can go for, either discernment counseling, either mediation, or to even just settle and discuss with each other, while considering if, let's say, the simplified divorce track is also easier, because my understanding is, of course, if they all agree outside of court and they go for simplified divorce track, it's actually faster, it's easier for themselves. So this doesn't get drawn out. And we have seen in the newspaper, there are some divorce that couldn't agree outside of court, and they can drag for as long as a decade, right? I've seen cases that actually goes on for 10 years of court proceeding, but they still can't agree on all these court relating matters. Yeah, so communication is key, and no matter how they are feeling about each other, as well as the problems that they are experiencing, it's important for them to know that the children still matters, that if, let's say, they are able to communicate and work this out effectively and efficiently, it's not just helping themselves, but it's really helping the family to be able to heal and to recover faster from this already painful event that they have to go through. Yeah.
That's really helpful to understand. So thank you very much, Ming Zhen and Teong Liang. Now let's move on to the Q&A session. I see that we have 37 questions, so everyone has been very active in submitting the questions to us. Thank you very much to our audience. As a reminder to you in the audience, you can submit more questions through Pigeonhole. Let me take us to our first question, which has a record 6 votes. Is co-parenting mandatory? What if one parent has a history of abusing our child?
Actually, okay, this is an interesting question. Okay. Co-parenting is encouraged, from what I understand, as much as possible, also because the court proceeding will have the separate aspect of the care and custody issues and decision that the court and the judges will have to make separately, right? If, let's say, there are history of abuse, it's really understandable that the parent might feel that the exposure of the child with the perpetrator will be unsafe, right? But first of all, we still goes back to first, how do the court actually decide on the matter? Secondly, right, if, let's say, abuse has taken place before, has there been the ministry involvement? Because usually when child abuse will have taken place, the Child Protective Services will also have made certain recommendation. And from my work within the community as child-centric social worker, my understanding is that even when there's Child Protective Service being involved, there are still plans that are in place that will try to actually allow interaction between the parent and the child. It can be done in different methods that can be done safely, right? So if the concern is about safety, perhaps the access will have to always be done in a public place, or will have to always be facilitated with professionals present, or be facilitated with another safe adult to be present. But most importantly, from my position, I think it goes back to what would the children want? What is their hopes and dreams and their own wishes as well. Do they want to actually remain contact with their parents, right? So I have actually seen cases where yes, there are in fact cases where during the initial divorce proceeding, the one of the parent has totally dropped out from the child's life, right? But 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, we don't know what will happen. And we have actually seen cases where after 10 years, the father is also aging, and sometimes also with the chronic illnesses that actually kicks in and come in, there are parents who wants a slightly different relationship, knowing that there are children that they also want to reconcile and build back the relationship before anything worsen or before life continue to worsen or change further, right? So I have seen parents who try to reach out to their children 10 years down the road, right? But it has also become difficult for the children to also take that first step to also want to know the parents, after that long a period of being distant away, right? So and we never know what happens in life subsequently, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road. Sometimes the children themselves might feel that it's important for the other parents to also be present and be involved in their life, especially maybe after they become parents themselves, right? So when it comes to relationship, I guess there are different ways that we can actually work around and consider, and whether this has also been discussed through with family members, with the children voices being heard, at the same time whether professional help has been sought, and whether this has been worked out and discussed through in terms of finding out different solutions. Yeah, but in terms of the legal matter, whether co-parenting is mandated, we will need Teong Liang to answer that.
I don't think the courts take the view that it should be mandated. I think it's certainly, as Ming Zhen rightly shared, right? It is to be encouraged, right? And that is really what the family law system is about, right? To encourage parties and parents in particular to think about the ability to co-parent. Yes, there will be some cases in the family violence situations, some a bad family violence situation where maybe co-parenting is not workable. Maybe at this point in time when the cases come to court. But the courts do have the power to order parties to undergo co-parenting counseling. So that's really an awareness, educational process, right? Where one may feel that there's no hope or there's just simply cannot be done. But with awareness, with education, with co-parenting counseling, hopefully things will change. But underlying all that, it's really for the children.
Yeah. And I think that's really pertinent to remember, is that it's always about the, taking care of the children ultimately. We have another question from our audience. If my spouse doesn't allow me to have access to my children despite the court order allowing me to have such access, what can be done?
Good question. It's a practical issue that has surfaced for quite some time now. The starting point is you have a court order, right? Two, it's a question of enforcement. Okay. And what I can say, at least at this point in time, is that problem has been recognized. And if you watch the space, the law will change or has changed, but it'll become operational to give the courts more powers to deal with breach of access orders. So for example, if access has been missed, so you're supposed to have under a court order, a weekend access and overnight access from Friday to Saturday or Saturday to Sunday, and that has not happened, right? And if you make the application to court, right, the court will have the power shortly to make orders for what we call make-up access. So for missed access. But certainly the period of make-up access is not more than what you had missed, for example, right? Two, the court can, for example, make an order for bond to be given, right, to secure access. Right?
Oh, I see.
So it has been recognized this is a problem, and the law has moved, right, to try and tackle
Keep up
this
with the
problem and to keep
yeah.
up with the problems, to be
Mm.
able to address these problems.
Okay, we have some very interesting fact scenarios, which we will not go into too much detail, given that we also don't have much time left. But I will highlight a couple. Maybe we can try and do it in a speed round, if that's possible. Are prenuptial agreements enforceable in Singapore?
The answer is no, they are not enforceable in Singapore, but the court will take into account a prenuptial agreement because there's an agreement made in contemplation of a divorce, but pre-divorce, pre-marriage, obviously. So yes, the courts will take it into account. It will not be bound by it. So you can't go to court and say, I have a prenuptial agreement and you just need to follow it.
Yeah.
That's not the position of the law as it now stands. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Teong Liang. We have one interesting question. I apologize. I shouldn't be laughing. Is it okay to ask my daughter who's 18 if it's okay for her parents to divorce? Ming Zhen, maybe this one is for you.
I think it's an interesting question. So we highlight again that when it comes to the marital issue, the marital difficulty and conflict, I think it's important for also adults to recognize that the decision to get married actually is the two individual, right? So the decision to get divorced should also lies with the adults in the family. Yeah, so there's no need, and it's important to also take note that the children shouldn't be involved in the process of making the decision on behalf and for them, because I'm very much aware also that children will also feel certain guilt, certain responsibility, or certain accountability, especially if they are the one who made the decision. So leave the children out of the marital decision or adult related issues as much as possible. The adults should be the one to make the decision, be responsible for it. But it's okay for the adults to also just let the children know that these are the thoughts processes, this might be happening, and to actually let them know that they are preparing to go for this, right? So, so the decision should lie with the adults, but it's important to communicate and let the children know that there is this intention and what is the plan moving ahead with this decision.
That's really helpful. Another question we have is, what if my wife is in jail? And sorry, I just lost the question. What if I'm going to use partner instead because I think wife is a bit specific, but what if my partner is in jail and it has been 5 years since this partner has been in jail? Can I divorce her after another 4 years? Or I guess the question is, how do I calculate an amount of time for us to be able to apply for a divorce?
Yeah, I suppose it's a question of if your partner is in jail and incarcerated, the other spouse may think that then I want to separate for whatever the reasons that led to the partner being in jail. So sometimes that's used as an unreasonable behavior reason. But if it's a separation, then the intention to separate doesn't need to be consensual.
Yeah.
So one spouse can have that intention. So it could be that if that spouse who's not incarcerated has the intention to put an end to marriage, then after 3 years, if the spouse in jail can consent, then yes. And that sometimes happens, because they do recognize, right, that they're in a bit of a bother. Right? If not, it's 4 years separation, then you don't need consent.
Right. I don't think we covered this in our earlier discussion, but is there a minimum period to wait out before a divorce can be granted? What is the earliest one can get it?
Correct.
Yeah.
So the time bars I was mentioning at the start is 3 years. So from the time of marriage, within the first 3 years, you can't file a divorce.
Yeah.
So you got to wait after the 3 years period.
Before you can start counting the reasons, or is it after that?
Is to commence divorce proceedings after 3 years of your marriage.
Okay.
So you could, at that point in time, you sort of, after 3.5 years, you can't rely on 4 years separation because you just don't have the time.
Of course.
But it could be other reasons. It could be divorce by mutual agreement, for example. Yeah.
I'm gonna maybe ask one last question. And I think this one we can give to Wait, I lost it again. Okay, we suddenly have a lot of extra questions coming back. So I'm going to, okay, I saw this one just now and I thought this was interesting because I think this person who asked it probably missed it from our earlier discussion. All the counseling that you've mentioned, Ming Zhen, is there a fee payable?
So for the 10 FEM and FSC across Singapore, it's free counseling so long that there is a Singaporean or PR within the family or the household. Even though I have to acknowledge that there might be a long wait list because it's a free counseling service, but they are able to actually get this service for free. Or if let's say they prefer not to wait, usually if they call FEM and FSC or they can go online to search for it, there are also other subsidized counseling services out there in Singapore. Yeah, if they don't mind paying a small sum and they don't want to wait for the wait list at FEM and FSC.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that was subsidized also.
Yeah, there are a lot of subsidized counseling services.
Wow, okay. Thank you so much for that, Ming Zhen and Teong Liang. Unfortunately, we are sadly out of time. Perhaps I can invite each of our speakers to leave us with one key takeaway. Maybe Teong Liang first.
Okay, so I get to go.
Yeah.
Easier said than done, no doubt. But if you all could consider making the best out of a bad situation, and in that process, remember that even you and your spouse can no longer get along and the marriage is no longer sustainable, both of you will always be parents to your children, right? You can choose your own spouse, but your children could not choose their parents, right? So just have that thought. I accept it's easier said than done in a situation where the marriage has broken down. But if you could just sort of take a few steps back and think about that in that process, right? And you know, in a normal intact family, the parent, mom and dad will always do what's best for the children. And I'm just going to suggest that when the marriage has broken down, the parents should try their best to also do what's best for the children in that scenario.
That's really, really a pearl of wisdom. What about you, Ming Zhen?
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, this is important. So pardon me if I'm looking at the screen. Yeah, because I've taken notes on this, right? Yeah. So divorce legal proceeding is a really stressful matter. I think no doubt that it is actually very stressful. It's very difficult, which is why we have this webinar and this kind of arrangement year after year, right? But what we are also concerned about is the individual and the people then. Yeah, and I think for this year reflection, what I've also came to understand and realize is that when the individual go through divorce, it's a very stressful process for him or her as well. So in terms of mental health and psychological health, it's actually very important to know that the longer and the more difficult the divorce legal proceeding is, the more stressful it is going to be for them, the more difficult it is for them to move on, the more difficult it is for them to manage their work and employment at the same time. Yeah, so it is always easier to make sure that the divorce procedure don't drag, that it's not a stressful process, right? So as much as possible, if they can agree outside of court on these matters, at least they don't have to fight it out in court. And try to seek help and communicate as early as possible, as much as possible. So by helping themselves to settle things out of court is to also to make sure that the children also don't suffer with them in the process. And once they have get the divorce proceeding outside of this whole picture, actually then they can be at their best capacity to look at each other as co-parents. And with the fact that they are co-parent with each other, do remember and take note that 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, they will have to actually see each other during the child's wedding. They might potentially have to help the child with the grandchildren as well. Yeah, so think about long-term implication, think about what is best for them as well as for their children in the long run. Yeah.
And I think with that, we have yet another pearl of wisdom, that is, life is very long.
Yeah, life is very long.
So that was our webinar. We will have to bring this session now to a close. If you found this webinar beneficial, and would like to share it with your family or your friends, the recording of this webinar will be made available on Pro Bono SG's YouTube channel in 2 weeks' time. The link will be provided in the chat. Next Thursday, at the same time of 7:30 p.m., we will have our last webinar for this Law Awareness Weeks at CDC 2024. That is navigating the employment landscape. The details you can see on your screen right now. Are you ready to navigate the evolving landscape of employment law and its impact on your workplace? Imagine a future where both employers and employees are fully equipped to thrive in a fair and balanced work environment. Discover the latest developments in employment law, from flexible work arrangements, FWA, and the Platform Workers Bill to the Workplace Fairness legislation, increased paternity leave, and unpaid infant care leave. That's a mouthful. Unpack critical employee rights and protections and explore the growing emphasis on training and upskilling to meet the demands of a rapidly changing workforce. Learn how companies are preparing for the future through restructuring, terminations, and retrenchments, and how both employers and employees can mitigate the complications that arise from employment termination. Understand what these shifts mean for all parties and how best practices, checks and balances, and compliance measures can help ensure smooth transitions. Do join our moderator, Regana Maideen, and speakers Amanjit Kaur and Patrick Tay as they discuss insights into future trends and how they will shape the employment landscape in Singapore, empowering you to stay ahead of the curve. This webinar is part of Law Awareness Weeks at CDC 2024. You can visit the website go.gov.sg/law-cdc or the event page on Pro Bono SG's website or Law Go Where to register for this webinar. The links will be dropped in the chat function. At the end of this webinar, a survey form will pop up on your screen for your completion. We appreciate your comments as it will be used to help improve our future webinars. And lastly, after today's fantastic sharing from our panelists, if you find that you require legal guidance on a legal issue, please do write to help@probono.sg. And I will repeat that email address again. It's help@probono.sg. We would like to express our gratitude to Teong Liang and Ming Zhen for sharing their knowledge and experiences with us. With that, on behalf of Pro Bono SG, we would like to thank you all for joining us today and wish you a good week ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry.